Chapter 11, Mental Health for Older Adults. As you read along in the textbook, keep the objectives in mind. You want to be able to identify various issues among older adults, identify differences between young old, middle old, and old adults, describe the demography of older adults, identify reasons why older adults are living longer, identify various types of social support for older adults, differentiate between the types of elder abuse and maltreatment, differentiate between the types of physical activity recommendations for older adults, describe spirituality and how it can affect mental health of older adults, and finally, be able to discuss interventions aimed to prevent mental health problems among older adults. Okay, so the distribution of the older population is changing here in the U.S. So older adults are those that are 65 years of age and older. However, because there's a lot of changes that can occur fairly rapidly or relatively rapidly after you turn 65, additional stratification may be needed. So the young old, okay, that category are going to be those that are 65 to 74 years old, middle old, 75 to 84 years of age, and then old, they're 85 years or older. Okay, so interesting to note, the percentage of older adults is expected to increase over time. So if the percentage is increasing in older adults, then other age groups are losing percentage, right? Because percentages are a proportion of 100. So if something increases from 40% to 50%, then that 10% had to come from somewhere else. So basically how you envision this is there's a large segment of the population that's aging, and we're kind of following that swell as it goes through time, okay? So basically, you heard about like baby boom, right? That represents a big group. You have Gen X after that, and so on and so forth. So, the age distribution of any population really isn't a constant. It's subject to change, and they do. Distribution can change over time. It should be no surprise that factors are not evenly distributed throughout the older population, and those factors may be determinants of mental health in older adults, right? So here we start to see some disparity. Women tend to outnumber men as human beings age. Women just tend to live longer. Account for 56% of those greater than or equal to 65. And if we increase it to greater than or equal to 85, there's even a higher proportion of women make up that population. Older populations expect to become more racially diverse. We start to see life expectancy increases in other racial groups, which will contribute to them being around to be counted as part of that population later on. And then some states, there's unequal distribution. Down here in Florida, not relatively high proportion, which you can attest to. The weather's mild. There's a lot of infrastructure in place, especially down here in South Florida, that, if you were relocating from another area and you had existing health conditions, I'm fairly certain you could find a specialist relatively close to wherever you live in South Florida. The lowest proportion of older adults in Alaska, Utah, surprisingly Texas. The interesting thing would be to look in and try to explain this, right? Alaska, it's a little bit more challenging environmental conditions, which may be more difficult on older people. Utah, it may be a lack of healthcare resources within driving distance. I'm just speculating here, but that's kind of thing that we would do is kind of look, okay, well, why are these things standing out? That's what we do with any population, just to better inform ourselves as to what's going on. Consider living arrangements of older adults and how change could disrupt your routines. You may be many decades married, widowhood, losing your spouse. That's a big change that could contribute to mental health issues. Marriages don't just end with divorce. The death of a spouse is an event of tremendous significance. Depending on the ability of the person to remain independent, loss of a spouse could result in new living arrangements. And that can be either welcome or unwelcome. Sometimes we don't have a choice in certain situations, and as we get older, we may find ourselves losing the ability to have input to a choice simply because we're unable to maintain a level of independent living. Health status of the older adult tends to degrade over time. Life expectancy comes to the forefront as end of life draws near. How much longer do I have left? Have I done all the things that I want to do? All that kind of reminiscing type of thing starts to occur. If we look at stats from the slide, we can see an example of life expectancy. So what I'm here talking about is the second bullet. So life expectancy for older adults, age 65, is we expect them to live another 19.3 years, which carries them to 84.3 years old. However, if we're working with a group that they're aged 85, right, they've already surpassed this 19.3 that we've given them here, we give them another 6.6. So it's kind of like, well, if you hit this milestone of 65, you've kind of avoided all of the risk factors that lead to premature death. And because of that, we give you another 19.3. You make it to 85, you overcome even more challenges, and perhaps your genetic makeup, you're predisposed to live longer, give you another 6.6. But this is epidemiological data that allows this type of relationship to work. So, if we were looking to increase life expectancy among the population, right? So one of the first things we can look at is like, okay, well, let's get people to 65, right? Because that would be in line with an 84 to 85-year-old life expectancy. And then we could have a more specialized program. Okay, once a person reaches 65, what can we do to make it increase the likelihood they're going to make it to 85, right? Because if they make it to 85, then we give them another 6.6. So again, understanding what's going on, what's driving the relationship between these numbers can help us come up with appropriate solutions to various health issues that affect the older population. When considering the older population, we can see heart disease, cancer, and respiratory disease are the leading causes of death. From a programming standpoint, we can prioritize our efforts around addressing those leading factors, or having epidemiology available to us that kind of uses the total numbers to determine this top 10 leading causes of death. Well, if we want to increase life expectancy, we need to look at, well, what's taking the lives of people? Heart disease. Okay, well, what prevention efforts and programs can we put in place to maybe alleviate this? Right, there's always going to be some cause of death. But all we can do programmatically is treat these as burdens to the particular population we're working with and develop programs to help alleviate those burdens. That's kind of the cycle that we get into when we're working on improving population health. Chronic diseases are often associated with the burden they present to those dealing with chronic conditions. Burden represents everything from having to live with symptoms, the disabilities that may come along with the various conditions, therapeutic need, what do you have to do in terms of getting your treatment, doctor's visits. All of these things come along with that diagnosis. And that's the burden that you now have to carry, and that can negatively impact individuals' quality of life. As with most health issues, we know that there are many disparities in this health outcome. So here's gender disparities, racial disparities. There's always going to be disparities. And from a health promotion standpoint, right, we want to eliminate health disparities. So anytime we see differences, we want to look at, okay, what's driving those differences? Can we come up with a preventive program to address those things? As we age, our mental health burden increases. Cognitive decline is a very real possibility. and may be impaired to the point of needing institutionalization. Depression is prevalent for this age group. Think back to all the changes that are occurring, how a sense of loss can contribute to feelings of depression when people are retiring, losing that sense of identity from their occupation, divorce, loss of a spouse. There's a lot of things that can impact a person's outlook on life, which can be, precursor or risk factor to suffering some of these mental health illnesses that we've talked about. Like I said, retirement, it alters the picture of ourselves. We spend a number of decades in a career, and many of us have built an identity around what we do for a living. When we no longer have an occupation, what becomes of us? Who are we at that point? For some, the loss of identity is too much to bear, and they may slip into depression. For others, retirement may seem like the lifelong goal they've been working towards, but due to financial concerns, they have to remain in the workforce much longer than they expected. Social Security, while it is an entitlement program, in my opinion, it should be considered a supplement to other retirement plans that you have working on. Time will tell for me, and I guess for you guys as well. What Social Security brings to us in our older ages. We'll just wait and see. But my approach is that I'm going to make arrangements now to secure my my financial plans in retirement, rather than relying on what Social Security can do for me. Okay, determinants and influences on the mental health of older adults. Determinants, I've probably said this in every one of the lectures this semester, but again, we're not dealing with causal relationships, rather contributory causes. Okay, sleep patterns change as we age, and among the older populations with chronic conditions, there may be difficulty maintaining a full night's sleep, which can lead to drowsiness throughout the day. Maybe you look at your grandparents and maybe you notice they take naps during the day. That could be a result because they're not getting a full night's sleep beforehand, because of having to wake up, or being very sensitive to sound or light, and their sleep patterns just get disrupted. Memory loss associated with poor sleep quality. Depression can set in because you constantly feel like you're having to catch up, you don't have any energy. And when we compare that to individuals that report receiving a good night's sleep, there's a lot of benefits that come along with that. So sleep is something that could be a topic for a program in this population. Okay, social support. It's a tremendous resource for mental health in older adults and anyone really. There are 7 types, we can further delineate social support into more specific categories based on kind of what you're getting from the support. So emotional support, instrumental, informational, appraisal support. And one of the things we find that not only is receiving support kind of beneficial to health, but from a caregiver standpoint, the act of giving support to someone else can also be therapeutic in the sense that it does bring you a sense of accomplishment, a sense of giving, and it could give you a better outlook on life. Okay, elder abuse and maltreatment. As someone loses their ability to remain independent and they start to rely on caregivers, there can be opportunities for abuse and maltreatment to kind of creep into the situation. So 7 types of elder abuse. It could be physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, neglect, abandonment, financial. We see the financial come up, like receiving text messages or phone calls asking for banking information and that sort of thing, taking advantage of someone's trusting nature, or someone that's maybe not as familiar with the technology or the types of scams that are being present. It's just an awful situation that unfortunately has to be addressed in order to protect this vulnerable population. And then self-neglect, a form of self-abuse. And it doesn't have to be an intentional type of thing. It could be due to mental health issues, cognitive issues. The person just stops taking care of themselves, which can create a very unsafe situation for those individuals. Okay, so looking at, so what do we do about that? Well, you can start to look at these risk factors and start looking at disparities that kind of exist in there, and start forming your target population and saying, how can abuse and maltreatment be introduced based on psychological status, behavioral acculturation. We can look at other external factors, living arrangements, history of previous abuse, right? We want to kind of gather all the information, all the details we can, so we can better understand what's going on within the context of the situation that we're dealing with. That's going to be the case with any type of health-related issue that we work on, regardless of the population. It's still going to be the same type of approach. What can we learn about what's going on with this population within this particular context? Because that's what's going to inform us, what needs to be done in terms of bringing these programs to light. Physical activity, right? It's always going to be a strong factor that's needed in most populations, but because of the physical decline that's occurring as we age, right, physical activity can become very important to helping us or allowing us to maintain or at least slow down the degradation with regard to our health status. Different types of aerobic physical activity, muscle strengthening activity. Again, everything has to be designed around the population that you're working with. Balance window issues are going to be pretty prevalent in older population, meaning that you're going to have to adjust any recommendations for physical activity with regard to preventing slips, trips, and falls while they're engaging in physical activity. Some of the barriers that you'll run into, and you have to consider that, because you got to think about how are we going to help the overall population overcome the barriers that stand in the way of physical activity so that they can engage in physical activity. So recognizing and knowing what to do, or planning ahead of time, how you're going to deal with that, it's always going to be important. Spirituality and religiosity are constructs that, again, we can look at these among other populations, but we tend to find these issues to be of importance in older population. The dogmas associated with maintaining a level of spirituality or religiosity, a lot of times people don't look at it, they look at it from a standpoint as, how does this soothe my my conscience in terms of having a guiding spiritual or religion to kind of devote myself to. But if you stand back and you look at a lot of the dogmas associated with particular religion, you can think of religion and spirituality as being forms of coping mechanism, helping to deal with stressful situations. Well, that may not be their sole purpose. They can bring relief to individuals that rely on spirituality and religion and other aspects of their life. Well, we can certainly use it to help cope with stressors, that we find ourselves dealing with on a day-to-day basis. Go to here, mental health interventions for older adults. So to close out the chapter, just go through, look at the interventions and look at kind of what they're trying to accomplish with each intervention, and then kind of look at the strategies that they're utilizing to see, okay, well, how do they see the pathway to reaching those accomplishments? All right, so that does it for chapter 11. Like I said, just continue to read along in the book, and thanks for watching.